Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just begin by sharing my screen and we'll get underway. Screen two and presentation. You can all see it, right? Just want to make sure. Okay, great. All right. Thank you so much for taking some time with your lunch as we go through this wonderful lunch and learn experience together. I appreciate you joining me. As I wanted to talk to you today about this really exciting area in business and in, of course, accounting and finance, and that is about environmental social governance. Um, this topic has been around for a real long time, but it's only seen a lot more interesting discussions because of our political environment that we're in today. Now, in Europe and in other areas around the world, environmental social governance has become mandated with company reporting, especially when it comes to their earnings. Now, however, here in the United States, that it has not been the case because of political differences, we'll say. And so I always thought that was interesting. And the topic in itself is really critical to business sustainability. And that's why I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to talk about this, because business sustainability is a very delicate area right now, and it's something that a lot of business schools and students and a lot of other people are focusing on is the sustainability aspect. And so that's why I wanted to bring up environmental social governance. The other reason why I'm bringing this topic up today is because of my recent experience with the Fulbright program, being in Medellin, Colombia, focusing on environmental social governance and the impact on corporate profitability and teaching individuals in Colombia about the importance of implementing ESG into their businesses. And so today I'm going to talk about both experiences, and I'll also discuss the importance of ESG from a sustainability perspective. You already know who I am, so I'm not going to go through my introduction, but I'm happy to be here to talk about this topic with you. So first, some of you may not be familiar with the topic of environmental social governance, so I wanted to quickly highlight what it is and why it's important. So and how it differs from corporate social responsibility, which is probably a term that you have heard before. So ESG focuses more on the measurable and quantifiable criterion used by investors, companies, and regulators to assess your organization's sustainability and social impact. On the environmental side, it involves the company's impact on the planet, including issues like carbon emission, water use, waste management, and biodiversity. Uh, you're probably familiar with what carbon emissions are. If you drive a vehicle, your vehicle probably emits carbon, assuming that's not electric. And you're probably familiar with your water use at home. If you run the dishwasher like I am right now, or if you're doing laundry, or you're using it for drinking water, or you're using it for bathroom purposes. Your water consumption has a dramatic impact on the planet. Your carbon emissions has an impact on the planet. Your waste management has an impact on the planet if you're recycling or not recycling or whatever the case may be. And of course, your footprint has an impact on the planet from a perspective of biodiversity. Biodiversity is the various um, ecological components that we have. So, for example, in the forest, we have a lot of trees. If you cut a tree down in the forest and replant a tree, do you think the same birds are going to come back to that tree? Do you think the same microorganisms are going to come back to that new tree? Probably not. And so the impact on deforestation is is pretty dramatic because uh, there's the thought that we're deforesting at the same rate that we're reforesting. In some cases, that's true, but they're not understanding the impact on the biodiversity when through the deforest and reforestation process. So that's the environmental side. And then the social aspect of ESG is we look at how a company evaluates and manages relationships with employees, customers, suppliers, and the communities in which they operate. Examples, of course, include things like labor practices, diversity, and human rights. Now, ESG together is a really impactful component in business. And it's important that we, as educators, understand this because it's important of how we convey this message and this topic to our students. From the governance side of things, we've looked at leadership, ethics, corporate practices such as transparency, executive pay, and anti-corruption measures. Now, when we think of governance, we look at governance from a corporate governance perspective, but we also look at it from a regulatory perspective, which is, of course, the government side of governance. So we look at both of those together when we talk about ESG. It's important to distinguish and understand the difference between ESG and corporate social responsibility, also known as CSR. While CSR often refers to the vulnerability actions that a company takes to improve the social impact, ESG involves metrics like investor, stakeholder, and activities to make decisions. So that's the primary difference between corporate social responsibility and environmental social governance. So in taking a bit of a deeper look at the individual components of ESG, it's important to think about the impact that companies have on the environment, on the local society, and from a governance perspective. So this slide kind of really highlights those things. The three pillars are interconnected and form the basis of sustainable business. As we move forward, think about how these components might apply to business in various industries and in local communities. On this slide, I look at the difference between environmental social governance and corporate social responsibility in a little bit more of a thorough way. Although both of these concepts seek to promote sustainability and ethical business practices, they're different significantly in their approach, purpose, and implementation. ESG includes specific metrics such as carbon emissions, labor practices, and broad diversity, making it an integral part of financial decision making. On the corporate social responsibility side, the initiatives are valuable. They often are not directly linked to those types of measurements or measurable results or financial performance. So the key difference is that ESG integrates sustainability into business strategy and financial metrics, whereas corporate social responsibility often involves external voluntary activities that may not directly connect to the company's operations. So to kind of summarize the difference between the two, ESG is about embedding sustainability into business processes and ensuring transparency, while corporate social responsibility is based more on goodwill and operational initiatives. Now, during my time in Colombia, my focus was, of course, in Latin America. The study that I was involved with respect to environmental social governance focused on the countries of Colombia, Peru, Chile, and Mexico. And in this focus, we looked at the ESG components and it as a direct impact on their environment, social, and governance. And one of the biggest things that we realized in Latin America, especially in Colombia, is deforestation of the Amazon rainforest. With respect to Brazil, Colombia, and Peru, they're, of course, the hardest hit because the Amazon rainforest covers the majority of the land across those three countries. The destruction of the Amazon rainforest has a significant impact on biodiversity. And the destruction also reduces carbon sequestration and it accelerates climate change. In Colombia, the deforestation is driven by agriculture, illegal mining, and infrastructure projects initiated by the government. The forest loss directly affects the indigenous communities, wildlife, and water systems. Water management, as you are all probably very likely aware of, is one of the most critical components facing human sustainability on this planet. We're running out of water, essentially. And this scarcity has a direct impact on industries like agriculture and mining, which has a direct impact on economies, which has a direct impact on sustainability in life. So water management is very critical for everyone involved. Mining operations in Colombia have often resulted in contaminated water supply, which of course affect both communities and ecosystems. So through this, we also looked at climate change, which is changes in the rainfall patterns, rising temperatures, and sea level changes that have had significant impacts on agriculture that's particularly vulnerable because crops such as coffee and bananas have reduction in their yields. So when you think about the rising cost of coffee or the rising cost of chocolate, which we're seeing now, or the rising cost of bananas at the grocery store, or other agricultural products that you normally purchase at the grocery store, the cost is not from price gouging or some type of nefarious profit thing that the companies want to do. It's a direct result from the fact that there's just not enough yield in the crop because of changes in rainfall patterns and rising temperatures and sea levels, etc. So to address these challenges, there's a needed collaboration between governments, businesses, and communities. By adopting environmental social governance practices, countries like Colombia can reduce environmental damage while creating sustainable opportunities. Now, during my study in environmental social governance, it was important that I talked to a lot of business owners in Colombia, especially the smaller entrepreneurs, because it's important that entrepreneurs understand environmental social governance and what the overall impact is because of their need for sustainability. And so it was important that we taught these entrepreneurs environmental social governance concepts. So there's a couple of key things that you're seeing here on this slide, like such as competitive advantage, operational efficiencies, and market trends. All of these things, of course, are what every entrepreneur is looking for. You know, they want that efficiency. They want to be competitively advantaged. And they want to be able to adapt to the market trends in order to increase sales. Now, it's really important that we supported local education programs creating fair employment opportunities and protecting nearby ecosystems so that businesses can strengthen their social impact. So, not only do these efforts improve the company's reputations, but they also increase employee retention and loyalty. So, by leading the adoption of environmental social governance, entrepreneurs can position themselves as agents of change, driving innovation and sustainability within the region. So, what makes environmental social governance so important? Why did I want to focus on this topic, or why did I feel like it was important for you to understand what ESG is, and why is it important for sustainability? This is important for all of us because, from an environmental social governance perspective, we need to be able to sustain life. And the way we do that is not only through corporate sustainability, but also through environmental and social sustainability. Now, we don't focus a lot on this topic here in the US, again, because of the political reasons, but it's important to understand that the rest of the world does. And since we are a global institution, it's important that we understand these concepts of ESG. So, from a perspective on the country of Colombia, which is where the study took place, it was important for me to be able to demonstrate that companies have the ability to improve business reliance. ESG practices help companies to identify and manage risk related to the climate change, resource scarcity, and social expectations. Uh, so, an example of this is that a company that invests in renewable energy is better prepared for future fluctuations in energy prices. Companies with strong governance are less likely to face scandals or regulatory fines, ensuring long term stability. The other thing that's important for companies to understand about ESG is that it can be used in a way to attract new investors. Investors increasingly prefer companies with strong ESG practices because they are seen as more sustainable and less risky. Global funds and financial institutions now include ESG criterion in their decision making process. For example, in Colombia, promoting ESG could attract foreign direct investment and encourage local entrepreneurship. I have an example of this that I used while I was there, and that was about the company we all know, and some of you might like it more than the other company that does the same thing, Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola is, as you are probably aware, the world's largest, maybe second largest, depends on the 51-49% relationship with Pepsi. Uh, Distributor of snack foods and soda beverages and the like. They're also one of the largest global companies. And what Coca-Cola does, and if you look on their investor relations page specifically, they tout their ESG score. They tout their ESG as not only an initiative but also best practice in business. It's a great thing to attract new investors with, and it's not just what you might consider greenwashing. It's an actual thing, right? And so that's why I used the example of Coca-Cola during the study. Um, for those of you who don't know what greenwashing is a way for a company to say that they are doing the right thing, being environmentally conscious, etc., but not actually doing it. That we call that greenwashing, and that's a concern in the ESG space, and we make sure to try to address that. Now, ESG also helps to improve a company's reputation. So companies that prioritize ESG tend to gain the trust of consumers, governments, and communities. For example, a Colombian agricultural exporter with fair labor practices and eco-friendly farming methods can gain a competitive advantage in global markets. So if you think about coffee, for example, that's my favorite beverage. That's my beverage of choice is coffee. Uh, those of you who have known me long enough, you know that I'm pretty much a coffee addict. And so but the one thing you might not know about me and my coffee addiction is that I usually try to only drink coffee that comes from a sustainable farm. Uh, so well, during my time, I actually had the opportunity to visit a coffee plantation. I picked cherries from the coffee trees, and I even had an opportunity to roast the coffee. And at the end of the experience, I got a chance to drink the fruits of my labor, so to speak. And it was a really cool experience. And so through that experience, I learned so much about what it means to be eco-friendly farming, or what it means to employ fair labor practices. Uh, we learn about these kind of things in a textbook, great, but when you actually go to a farm and experience it for yourself, then you get it. You have a new appreciation for it. And so what I learned about coffee in that is that now I try to only drink coffee that comes from the same source. What I mean by that is it comes from the same region in the world. So if you go to Starbucks, you might think, oh, Starbucks is of good quality because it's expensive. That's not always true. So what Starbucks oftentimes does is they create what they call a blend, and the beans come from all over the place. And so that's the taste is a lot different, the quality is a lot different, and the sustainability is a lot different. And so um, the best approach is to look at where it's coming from. And if it's a single source, it's the best. If it's multiple sources, it's probably not as good. So just a little fun fact. Um, Companies also look at this supporting sustainable development. ESG aligns with uh, the broader goals of sustainable development, environmental protection, and social equity. So what we look to do is to reduce deforestation, improve working conditions, and ensure transparency that's critical to achieving long-term economic and social goals. So all of these practices of ESG together truly make for a better economic and sustainable business environment. So we did a lot of research in in uh, in Latin America. We looked at companies across Colombia, Peru, Chile, and Mexico, and we only looked at the publicly traded companies because those were the only companies we could get all the data from. And we looked at the data from a lot of different perspectives, especially from a financial and accounting perspective. We looked at their financial performance. We looked at the trends related to their environmental social governance performance, and we tried to identify the trends. And so this study was huge. We looked at 196 companies, and it took their researchers several years of data collection and the identification of trends. And what we find is that companies that effectively manage their environmental social governance factors are better protected against regulatory, reputational, and operational risk. For example, the research from global investment firms indicate that portfolios that include ESG focused companies consistently generate higher returns. And so, what the relevance was of this study to Latin America and Colombia specifically is that evidence shows that environmental social governance practices are essential to address local challenges such as deforestation, labor rights, and water scarcity. For example, studies on ecotourism in Colombia showed how the preservation of biodiversity boosts both economic and community well-being. Uh, so we through the identification of the research, gathering the data, looking at the trends, and start beginning to draw conclusions, we also identified our future trends. So ESG is becoming a mandatory part of global trading and investment strategies. Companies that are left behind risk losing access to capital and markets. And this is especially true in Europe, where ESG reporting is required by publicly traded companies. So we try to encourage companies to see environmental social governance as an opportunity to innovate and lead their various business sectors. So the empirical evidence is very clear. ESG is not just a trend, but a proven path to long-term success and resilience. So in talking about these trends, we look at new established global frameworks. We looked at the European Union's sustainable financial disclosure regulations. And of course, we looked at investors and their demand for transparency. And so what we find was a couple of different things. Here in the United States, the Securities Exchange Commission has been considering rules for climate-related disclosure. Of course, because of the political environment, that has not yet been implemented. However, the rulemaking is in progress through the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, which is a part of the Financial Accounting Standards Board here in the United States. In other areas around the world, that there are mandates, as I had mentioned. In Colombia, the ESG reporting is gaining traction, especially in sectors such as finance, agriculture, and mining. However, the disclosure is voluntary at this time. It is not mandatory. But I am and have been working with the Colombian government in looking at their desire for mandatory disclosure and the right approach to implementation. So that's an ongoing discussion I've been having with them. Consumers around the world are demanding more transparency and accountability from companies. So if you look at, for example, if you look at your water bottle, look at a water bottle, for example. It's got a couple things on this water bottle. It shows that this is a plastic bottle. It shows that the cap has been recycled. So the cap, that's great. And it shows, of course, all of the other facts about the recycling. So that is in a couple of different when we look at this, there's a couple of different things. Why is this on the label? So that's the first question that we might ask. Well, it's on the label because the company who made the water company who made these bottles is trying to demonstrate their commitment to recycling. So, but was this label on here because they wanted to attract new investors? is the label on here because they wanted to demonstrate to their consumers that they're being environmentally conscious? Or is it because it's required that the label is on there? So a lot of this has to do with the consumer demand for sustainable practices. So when you look at something like a water bottle or a can of soda, and you look at that recycling label, what does it say? So it's just an interesting thing to think about. So studies show that millennial and Gen Z consumers are more likely to support brands with sustainable practices. In Colombia, specifically, industries such as fashion, coffee, and tourism are adapting to meet these changing consumer preferences. Now, it's also important that through this trend, that there's an identification of corporate responsibility and greenwashing prevention. Governments and organizations are implementing stricter regulations to ensure that ESG claims are authentic. Greenwashing, where companies falsely promote themselves as being sustainable, is under attack by consumer protection laws. So, companies are expected to provide verifiable data to support their ESG initiatives, especially if that company is publicly traded. They can't just say that, yes, we're implementing ESG. They have to demonstrate it through verifiable data. The UN Sustainable Development Goals serve as a framework for global sustainability efforts, and international agreements such as the Paris Agreement emphasize the need for business participation to achieve those environmental goals. So the key point that I'm trying to get across here in looking at these global trends is that these trends and regulations highlight that ESG is not an optional thing, but a requirement for companies to remain competitive and responsible in a globalized world. So this slide shows examples of how ESG practices are implemented in different industries and regions. The examples highlight the tangible impact of ESG on business, communities, and the overall environment. Uh, these examples demonstrate that companies can integrate ESG into their operations and decision-making processes to create positive and measurable outcomes. By sharing these examples, we can inspire companies and communities to adopt ESG strategies that align with unique needs and opportunities. Now, more specifically, because when I was doing the study in Colombia, we looked at the overall uh, impacts of ESG and the benefits thereof in Colombia. And so I'll just kind of summarize things, is that the ESG adoption is not just about compliance. It's a powerful tool to promote sustainable development, improve global position, and ensure long-term prosperity for the country of Colombia. So those are the benefits of ESG. Now, of course, no great undertaking is without its challenges. So implementing ESG and adopting ESG are very challenging for any business to do. And it oftentimes starts with, why is it important to do this? And what are the challenges that we might face? So a couple of key things to think about. From a financial perspective, many organizations struggle to align ESG metrics with traditional financial key performance indicators. For example, a company might find it difficult to quantify the return on investment, or ROI, of initiatives such as carbon reduction or community engagement. These challenges lie in demonstrating that ESG practices contribute to long-term profitability and value creation. When it comes to implementing ESG, there's high upfront costs. Implementing ESG practices often involve significant upfront investment, such as adopting renewable energy systems or retrofitting facilities to be more energy efficient. Small businesses, in particular, commonly lack the financial resource to make these types of changes, despite the potential long term benefits. From the regulatory and reporting side, it becomes relatively complex. Navigating changing landscape of ESG regulations and reporting standards can be quite tricky. Companies must ensure that compliance with local and international regulations, which oftentimes differ in scope and requirements. For example, in Colombia, a company that exports goods to Europe must comply with stricter European Union regulations on carbon emissions. And of course, we also face cultural and organizational resistance. Resistance to change within an organization can hinder the adoption of environmental social governance practices. Employees or leaders oftentimes see ESG as a cost rather than an opportunity, leading to a lack of engagement. Raising awareness and building a culture of sustainability are critical to overcoming this barrier. And also, when there's a lack of uh, local expertise and infrastructure, this also has a great impact on being able to implement ESG. So if there's no way to get goods in and out, or the infrastructure just isn't prepared for renewable energies, that oftentimes becomes a barrier. So overall, overcoming these challenges requires a collaborative environment between companies, governments, and communities. By addressing these barriers, countries like Colombia can accelerate ESG adoption and unlock its full potential. Ultimately, we would be faced with these same obstacles here in the United States, should the country go in that direction of implementing ESG. So we examined a lot of key factors in our study when it came to the integration of ESG metrics with financial KPIs. The overall message here on this part of the study was integrating ESG metrics with financial KPIs is not only possible, but it's oftentimes necessary to demonstrate the financial value of sustainability. This ensures that ESG initiatives are seen as investments rather than costs. When it came time for me to speak with the local community of entrepreneurs, I talked a lot about the understanding of what a competitive advantage is and operational efficiencies, and what the overall impact of competitive advantage and operational efficiencies are from an ESG perspective. So we talked about sustainability and long-term growth, where ESG provides a framework for sustainable growth, ensuring that companies can thrive while contributing positively to their communities and environment. And I encouraged entrepreneurs to see that ESG is not just a cost, but it's an investment in long-term success and resilience. As you're likely aware, a lot of Latin America, especially Colombia, is a developing nation. These are developing nations. And ESG offers countries like Colombia a path to sustainable development and economic growth. By focusing on these opportunities, the country can improve in its the countries can improve in global reputation while improving the quality of life for their citizens. So throughout the study, we also developed a step-by-step framework for adopting environmental social governance. Uh, and overall, the successful ESG adoption requires a collective effort, clear policies, and a commitment to transparency and accountability. Especially in the country of Colombia, this has the potential to be to have Colombia be a regional leader in ESG if these steps are adopted. And just to kind of help you to further understand the Pacific Alliance, which is Colombia, Chile, Peru, and Mexico. Each country has specialization that their sectors are really strong in. And the Pacific Alliance offers a wealth of examples for implementing ESG effectively. By learning from their neighbors, Colombia can accelerate their progress towards sustainability and economic growth. So here we can see how each country is, where their strengths are and where they can best implement ESG practices. So a couple of practical conclusions that I gave for our entrepreneurs is that ESG is not just about compliance, it's an opportunity for transformation. By making sustainability a priority, companies in a country like Colombia can lead the regional and global efforts to create a better future for everyone. Which of course led to a call to action. Every citizen has a role to play in building a sustainable future. Small actions, when combined, create a significant impact. By supporting environmental social governance initiatives, people can drive positive change for their country and the planet as a whole. And I also gave some future guidance to the country of Colombia. Their future can be defined by sustainability, innovation, and equity. By adopting ESG principles, the country can lead globally while improving their lives for their people and protecting their natural heritage. And I want to thank all of you for your time today in being here and listening to my discussion on environmental social governance and sustainability. It's really important that we as educators, especially in business, understand that ESG has a role to play across all businesses. So I again thank you for your time. Are there any questions, comments? I see Joe, your hand is up. Please, Joe.
I think Mohammed had his hand.
Mohammed, please.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. You're talking. Go ahead.
No, that's okay, Mohammed. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll ask a question and I'll make a comment. So you mentioned single source products. The best example for single sourcing is olive oil. So the biggest producers are, Spain, Italy, Morocco, Tunisia, Turkey, and Greece. Whatever you buy in Costco or Sam's Club is a cocktail. It's a blend.
Right.
And definitely single source, especially if it's coming from a good source, is the best. Now, from your research and your travel, how do you compare the concern for the environment among young people, within the society in Europe and in the US?
Yeah, great question. So I'll speak from the context of Latin America, since I had an opportunity.
No, I want these two areas, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Europe and the US.
Europe and US. So of course, younger people in Europe tend to be a lot more environmentally conscious, especially when it comes to their purchasing habits, as well as their consumption. They are definitely thinking about sustainability from a more conscious perspective than I believe that younger people in the US are. And I think a lot of that has to do with the messaging that comes from leadership in both the US and in Europe. In Europe, there's the alliance is a very strong when it comes to the messaging for sustainability, especially to younger people. And here in the U.S., it just simply isn't the case. So I think that there's a huge opportunity for us here in the United States to be stronger when it comes to messaging from a sustainability perspective. And what ultimately this leads to is improved brand reputation for companies and overall more sustainable environment.
I totally agree, Brandon, because this was my observation even 20 years ago when I worked in Wiesbaden in Germany for Abbott. I had two baskets next to my desk, one for recyclables and one for trash, regular trash. So if I made the mistake and put something in the wrong basket, I got lectured the next day by the cleaning lady. Don't do that. Thank you. Joe.
Okay, hi, Brandon. First of all, thank you for this wonderful information and your insights, and congratulations again on your Fulbright initiative.
Thank you.
I have two questions. My first question is, are you aware of any efforts going on, anywhere in the world, not just in any one particular continent, on how emerging technology is going to work against ESG, especially the E in ESG? Just as an example, each ChatGPT search takes 3 watt-hours of energy, right? So
That's right.
Imagine how much energy our students use when they use ChatGPT to finish their assignments, right?
Yep.
And this video call that we just had, this Zoom call, while you were making it, I just Googled and said, how much watts do that use? So one Zoom call apparently emits 1 kg of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere because of all the electricity that's used and the cooling and the emissions behind it. So is there any study done on that? That's my first question.
Yeah, great question. So there are a couple of studies underway currently on advanced technologies like artificial intelligence and their consumption of electricity and water specifically. Right now in our region, our UMGC region, in Northern Virginia, more specifically in Loudoun County, there are several current and new energy storage facilities that they're data processing centers. And these data processing centers are consuming a great amount of electricity and water because the water cools down the processing power. So if you think about your home computer, for example, your laptop, as you know, it gets really hot, right? So if you put it on your lap, it gets pretty warm. Well, why is that? Because the amount of energy being consumed in order to generate the processing power is significant, and that's why on the bottom or in every single computer there are multiple fans to help to cool down the processing unit. And so if you think about the additional needed consumption of electricity for those fans, the same is said with water. So for larger processing units, we need water to cool or liquid to cool the processing units. And so there's a huge consumption, to your point, Joe, of water and energy and electric energy in these data processing centers, especially in our region in Northern Virginia. And so there are a couple studies being done on this. The mitigation, however, is still to be seen because as of right now, and I've seen a couple of maps recently on this, is that our consumption of electricity is way higher than our current ability to produce. And so what we're seeing and will be seeing in the future, if we don't get more energy sources online soon, is we will be experiencing rolling blackouts at some point in the future.
So I guess while we try to plug one hole, we might be creating a leak somewhere else, right?
That's right. Yeah, and it's a constant battle. It really
Yeah.
is. And, you know, especially in today's environment, as you mentioned, with advanced technologies like AI, the energy consumption is way higher than what I think a lot of people anticipated. And so it's.
And I have a second question.
Yep, go ahead.
That was to your point that companies that do better on ESG also do better in general financially and
Correct.
in other ways. Is that a correlative study or is it
Yes.
a causality study? Because, you know, we have introduced ESG in our PMAN 650, and we have, I think, one of the units there that talks about ESG and company performance. And there's a raging debate going on. Some companies like McKinsey published articles that ESG results in better financial performance, but then a lot of people jumped on it. And it turned out that it's not clear whether ESG results in financial performance, better financial performance, or companies that are doing better financially have more money to invest in ESG.
That's correct. Yeah, and so that so our study was a correlation-based study, and so what we did is we looked at corporate profitability in relationship to ESG scoring, and then we broke it down by financial metrics. So we looked at you know, just general financial metrics like return on equity, return on investment. We ran so many different regressions to really Tobin's Q, you name it. We ran pretty much every possible financial metric that is available based off of the financial statements and reports by the publicly traded companies to understand the cause, the correlation. And what we found was, and just as you had mentioned, Joe, is that companies that performed well financially had higher ESG scores. And so however, I will also say that the relationship between corporate profitability and ESG is somewhat causal as well. So that there's.
So how is that causality determined? What study did you use to determine causality in one direction versus the other?
Yeah, so from the causality perspective, what we found is that because of the investments into ESG that the companies were making, their ESG scores went up, and also their profitability tended to trend upward as well. So you know, that's the effect, essentially the cause and effect relationship that we've identified. But there's, at this point in time, there's just not enough data to be definitive to say that yes, there is a causal relationship. I think that in the next few years we'll be able to get, when we have more data, and as more ESG is becoming mandated in the reporting, we'll be able to have a more definitive answer.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, great question. Ravi, and then Bajwa.
Yeah, so Brandon, as you know, there is a pushback now against ESG in certain states in the US, you know, woke capitalism, you know, and they throw words like that. And then we also saw in the news that some big companies and especially the financial institutions got scared, and they dropped out of this climate action body or whatever because and I think JP Morgan and BlackRock and some of the other big companies, they stopped being a member of this body because they were afraid of the government coming after them. And so we are sort of heading in the other direction in the US because of legislation and you know, these there is talk about going against these companies because of antitrust laws, you know, now because the perception is that these financial institutions were colluding among themselves to boycott fossil fuel companies, you know, companies that deal with either
Yeah.
guns or fossil fuels or whatever the bad companies are.
Yeah.
And so they said, you can't do that. That's illegal. This is antitrust. You are all colluding among yourselves to boycott certain industry sectors.
Mhm.
So when the rest of the world, like Colombia and other countries, see this, how are they going to work with the American companies that have a completely different philosophy versus what you are trying to promote in
Yeah.
in the rest of the world? I mean, it's all
Yeah.
global. Business is all global these days. So I'm just thinking, how is it all going to work?
So it's funny you bring that up because when I was in Medellin, Colombia, I landed the day of the U.S. elections, and so that was the first thing that anyone mentioned to me is what the hell is going on in America, right? And so, and they were pretty concerned about the fact that the U.S. is actually heading in the opposite direction that the rest of the world is. The perception of the U.S. On this topic is not great. However, it's important to distinct the fact that we here in the United States have the majority of multinational corporations. Their headquarters are typically here. So if you look at a company like Coca-Cola or Pepsi or whoever that has a worldwide footprint and reports both in Europe, United States, and elsewhere on their exchanges, it's important to have that distinction that the companies themselves are proactively governing themselves based off of the regulators. And so when I had a conversation with people in Colombia about what's happening here in the United States in the political spectrum, and that the influence from the political spectrum is having an impact on the business reporting of ESG or implementation thereof, they were kind of dismayed. And so I had actually given the recommendation to, especially to the Colombian government, to probably and I said this, I said, I would recommend that you follow the European Union when it comes to the implementation because they're way far ahead of the US in this area. Now, this is all going to change again, in pretty much every election cycle, but there is work being done here in the United States at the Financial Accounting Standards Board in Washington, D.C. They've set up a center that they have several rules that are being made in the process. But it's going to take some political willpower in order to get the implementation roll out, and we're not going to see that for the next 4 years at least. Is my guess. Great question, but yeah, that's a huge impact. Is the political spectrum.
Thank you, Brandon.
Thank you, Mohammed.
Yeah, great presentation, Brandon. My question is about sustainable agriculture.
Great.
I happen to work on this project for quite some time and this concept. And basically, due to increase of population in the developing countries, there was a concept of high yielding varieties to breed high yielding varieties, wheat and cotton rice. And these varieties are demanding great nutrients from the soil, like fertilizers. Then they are attracted by insects, so you need pesticides.
Yeah.
So all the commercial agriculture came in, that we have the high varieties, nutrition, and all that. When we talk about sustainable agriculture, there was a term which I want to share with you and everybody else. Is called LISA, LISA, Least Input Sustainable Agriculture.
Yep.
And we used to say that LISA's kiss is deadly. Why? Because in the underdeveloped countries, when we talk about sustainable agriculture, we simply means use the traditional resources, like farmyard manure kind of thing, not the fertilizer. Then use the plant-based pesticide, not the other one. But then you have to compromise yields. So yields will become low. And of course, the soil and agriculture will be sustained. And that's why the commercial farming come in. So what is your concept of sustainable agriculture, or whatever you observed in the countries that you study?
Yeah, great. Thanks for the question, Bajwa. So I'll say that in Colombia, it is illegal in the country of Colombia to import any type of pesticide. Pesticides are not used in agricultural farming in Colombia. It is illegal. to use any type of pesticide in Colombia, and which is not great. Well, it's good, but not good. So it's good because the food is really clean. Everything is very sustainable in practice, but it's not good because it limits yield in the crop, and it also has implications to what they can and cannot produce. So, for example, there are very little in the way of vegetables in Colombia because there are no pesticides used in Colombia. So it's very, very difficult for them to yield a variety of vegetables. Very, very few. It's mostly rice is one of the larger harvests, rice and beans and bananas, and that's about it in terms of any type of vegetable, because they don't allow the use of pesticides. So that's what a lot of Latin America in that respect has sustainable farming, because they don't use pesticides, but the yield is a lot lower. So it's a balancing act, and it's a very difficult one to achieve. And the utilization of resources like water and energy also have implications to the yield of the crops. So
Thank you.
great question. Yeah. Great. So I know that we're at time, so I want to be conscious of everyone's time today, and end by saying thank you so much for joining me today in this conversation. It means a lot to me, and hopefully you learned something new from today's discussion. And if you're ever interested in this type of work, feel free to reach out to me. I'm still doing a lot of research in this space. In fact, I'm working with Uni Remington faculty in Colombia for publishing. And so our goal is to have an article published this year. And but there's a lot more work to be done in the space. So if you're ever interested, please feel free to reach out.
Thank you, Brandon.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, Brandon.
Thank you. Thank you.
Congratulations again on the article.
Thanks. I
And
appreciate it.
Greg sharing it.
Oh, yeah, I saw. Yeah, that was nice of him. Yeah.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Brandon.
Yeah,
Great
thank
job.
you.
Thank
Good
you.
job.
Appreciate it.
Brandon,
Excellent. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.